Hello once again, friends, neighbors, fellow Christians, and welcome back to our channel and to our ministry here at What the Bible Says. We so deeply appreciate you taking the time to study with us each time that we upload a video, and hopefully we can consider some thoughts that are beneficial, that are edifying to you and helping you to better understand God's Word in its context. And again, if this is your first time viewing our channel, we hope that you will hit the subscribe button and the little bell icon so that you'll receive notifications each time that we upload a video, and that you'll hit the like button. And we so appreciate that, and if you are so inclined, that you'll even leave comments under our videos, and these things are appreciated, and it's good to hear from those who are watching and listening and studying, most importantly. And so as we get into our study this morning, we are continuing in this series where we're looking at the parables of Jesus. And so we've come down through Matthew chapter 24, the Olivet Discourse, and we have come now to the parable of the wedding, the wise and the foolish virgins. And this is still the Olivet Discourse. This is one unbroken conversation, and he is discussing when, he's answering the question of when would be the sign of his parousia. When would these things be? What will be the sign of your parousia? And at the end of the age. And so this is what he's discussing, and he's giving them different pictures, parables, analogies, and exhorting them and encouraging them and warning them that because they don't know the specific time, even though it be in their generation, even though they don't know the specific time, day and hour, that they were to be watchful. And that is the crux of all of these parables, these kingdom coming parables, is that they are to watch. And he's likening the coming of the kingdom and the coming of the Son of Man in his kingdom to things that they're acquainted with, and using those analogies. So, okay, in the same manner, then you need to be watching for these signs that I'm giving you. All right, so we're going to get into our lesson here with Matthew chapter 25, and beginning in verse 1, and hopefully my software is working and you can see this on your screen. And he says, "Then shall the kingdom of heaven be likened unto 10 virgins, which took their lamps and went forth to meet the bridegroom." All right, so it begins with then. All right, then is a time word. Then is always a time word. So we'd ask the question, when? Since then is a time word, it indicates timing. So when is then? Well, if you back up, and again, just very briefly, Jesus said immediately after the tribulation, and that's the Great Tribulation. That was foretold in Joel 2, 1 and 2, and in Daniel chapter 12. And Jesus conflates those prophecies in the Olivet Discourse. And he says immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be dark and the moon will not give her light, stars fall from heaven, and the powers of the heavens shall be shaken. And that's taken right out of Joel 3. It's reiterated in Hebrews chapter 12. He says, and then, when is then? Immediately after the Great Tribulation. Then shall appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven. And then, when? Immediately after the Great Tribulation, when the sign of the Son of Man would appear in heaven. Then shall all the tribes of the earth mourn, and they, all the tribes of the earth, shall see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. And this is what he says back in verse 27, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. It'll be like lightning coming from the east to the west, there in verse 27. But then he's still talking about his parousia, the parousia of the Son of Man, in verses 37 through 39, with the analogy of the days of Noah. And again, just like in the days of Noah, even though Noah had preached to these people for 100 years, and they had scoffed at him and mocked him and so forth, when God shut the door, then the time for repentance was over. And so the flood came as a surprise and took them all away. And so he says, so also shall the coming of the Son of Man be. Well, it wasn't You see, the flood didn't take Noah and his family away. They weren't destroyed in the flood, right? Why? Because they knew what to do. God told them what to do. Well, Jesus is telling these people what to do, his disciples, his apostles. And he's telling them to watch. And see, Jesus would come. He was coming. There's no conditionality in coming. And that's a farce that's been invented by man. There was no conditionality in coming. Jesus was coming. The results of that coming was the conditionality. If they were watching, they wouldn't be overtaken like a thief. If they were not watching, it would be a surprise. It would come on them like a thief in the night, and they'd be destroyed. That's the point. All right, so, and remember that this analogy Jesus uses here of the days of Noah, of the coming of the parousia of the Son of Man, Jesus uses the exact same analogy in Luke 17, and you see it on your screen there, in specific answer to when the kingdom would come. Not when the end of time would come, when the kingdom would come. And Jesus posited the coming of the Son of Man in his kingdom at the fall of the temple. Luke 21 and verse 31. So this parable begins here with, then shall the kingdom of heaven be likened unto 10 virgins which took their lamps and went forth to meet the bridegroom. All right. 5 of them were wise and 5 were foolish. And there's nothing to indicate here that the wise were just super geniuses in everything, and the 5 foolish were, well, they were just dumb, and they were dunce, and they were stupid, and they were fools in every. No, that's not the point, because it's explained why that the wise were wise and the foolish were foolish. The foolish took they took their lamps and they took no oil with them, verse 3. But the wise, they took oil in their vessels with their lamps. So this is how and or why that one group was foolish, the other group was wise. Okay? Now, I don't know that there's any significance in the number 10 and the 2 numbers of 5. I don't know. I've not figured that out. Maybe there is. I don't know. But the point is, half of them were prepared. And you know, in studying this parable of the wise and the foolish virgins, you know, this is something that we rarely studied in all of our growing up, as far as the meaning of the parable. In other words, the crux of what we got out of the parable was the foolishness versus the wisdom of the virgins. And you know, it's analogized as, well, the foolish, they were unprepared, and they were, that's true, and that these things represented, well, you know, Christians, when they come to the end of time at the second coming of the Lord, that they would come up short in their works. You know, James, he taught that you see that how by works a man is justified and not by faith only. Okay, so we can kind of make an analogy there. And the 5 that were wise, well, they were rich in good works, etc. You know, these were the types of things that we learned from this parable. And then, of course, one of the truths that they understood was this was pertaining to the second coming of the Lord. Okay, they had that part right. They just had the timing wrong. So they had that part right when the bridegroom. But this is dealing with the wedding. The wedding of the bride, that's Christ. Bridegroom is Christ, and the groom is the church. And so this is something that we were never taught, or at least if we were, I missed it. When did or would this wedding take place? So this was just a huge void in my study, at least, until I came to the understanding of all things fulfilled. Then these things began to make sense. All right, so let's continue on. So 5 were wise because they took their lamps with extra oil, and 5 were foolish because they did not take any extra oil with their lamps. And so verse 5 then, while the bridegroom tarried, they all slumbered and slept. Now, Let's recall that in Hebrews 10, Paul said, and again, that's if we submit that Paul's the writer of Hebrews, all right, that he said, for yet a little while, and in the literal, the Greek in the literal is a very, very little while. So it's emphasized that it's a very, very short time. For yet a little while, and he that shall come will come and will not tarry. Okay, so he was tarrying. All right, we need to get that. He was tarrying, and we think about 2 Peter 3 there, that he's not willing that any should perish, but that all should come to repentance. And by the way, that really sinks the boat of predestination, that he's not willing that any should perish. But nevertheless, he was tarrying. But there's another point that we need to get from all these parables, all of these kingdom coming parables, and that is that even though the bridegroom tarried in this parable here, or if we think about the parable where the Lord went away, or the good man of the vineyard went away for a long time and he returned, they always returned within the generation that this is the setting, the context. In other words, for the futurist to be right, then there needs to be some illustrations of the bridegroom going away and not returning for many, many, many generations, many thousands of years. There is no such illustration. Every time the landowner, the Lord, whatever, went away, the bridegroom went away for a period of time, they always, without fail, returned during the lifetime of the generation of whom they left. Okay, so we need to get that point. So while the bridegroom tarried, he was tarrying. But by the time of AD 60 or 65 or somewhere along in there, when Hebrews was written, then it was a very, very little while until he would come and he would no longer delay. That's why you read in Revelation that there should be time no more, time no longer. The time is over. There is no more delay. Okay? All right, so while the bridegroom tarried, they all slumbered and slept. And so this kind of reminds us of the parable we've just studied in Matthew 24:48, where Jesus said, but if the evil servant shall say in his heart, my Lord delays his coming. See, they weren't to do that. They weren't to think within themselves, well, we've got plenty of time. And so, again, if we think about the signs of the Olivet Discourse, and that there's a bunch of those that are not fulfilled yet, then why are people preaching the Lord's coming soon? He'll just come any minute. He can't come until those things are fulfilled. They're doing exactly what this evil servant is portrayed as doing, is saying, well, my Lord delays his coming. Well, at this particular time, he was tarrying. But again, it would be for a very, very short time. So they all slumbered and slept. And again, this is the whole point of all of these parables, is for them to be awake, be alert, to not be slumbering and not be watchful. Okay, so when we look again at 1 Thessalonians 5, because these Thessalonians knew the times and seasons of the day of the Lord, verses 1 through 4, all right? And Paul says, but you, brethren, are not in darkness, that day would overtake you as a thief. It was going to overtake their persecutors because they weren't watching and they didn't know. But it wouldn't overtake the Thessalonians. Now watch. You are all the children of light and the children of day. We are not of the night nor of the darkness. Now watch what he says. Therefore, let us not sleep as do others, but let us watch and be sober. So again, this is the same sentiment that is carried in all of these kingdom coming parables, and that is to watch and be ready. Don't be slumbering and sleeping. All right, in Romans 11, verses 7 and 8, Paul says, "What then? Israel has not obtained that which he seeketh for, but the election," that's the remnant, "but the election has," that's already, not shall obtain it thousands of years in the future. The election has obtained it, and notice, "and the rest were blinded, according as it is written, God has given them the spirit of slumber, eyes that they should not see and ears that they should not hear unto this day." And this is taken from Isaiah 29, verse 10 specifically. Now, I encourage you to go back. This is your homework. Go back and read Isaiah chapters 24 all the way through 29. Okay? This is the little apocalypse. And look at the things. We don't have time within the short scope of this video to go back and cover these things. But please take the time to do that. And Paul is appropriating in Romans 11 this prophecy from Isaiah 29 and verse 10. So you need to go there and get the context. All right, then Paul will go on to write in chapter 13 of Romans, "And knowing that the time," the with the definite article, "the time, that now it is high time to awake out of sleep. For now is our salvation nearer than when we began," than when we believed. "The night is far spent, the day is at hand." That's the same day that they would see approaching in Hebrews 10:25. So they weren't to abandon their episynagoge, their gathering together unto him. "The night is far spent, the day is at hand. Let us therefore cast off the works of darkness. Let us put on the armor of light." All right, Paul would write to the Ephesians, and he would say, "Wherefore he saith, Awake thou that sleepest, and arise from the dead, and Christ shall give thee light." Well, Paul is citing from Isaiah 51 and 52. And again, this is more homework. Read all chapter 51 and chapter 52 of Isaiah. But we're just going to hit a couple verses here. All right, verse 9. "Awake, awake, put on strength, O arm of the Lord." All right, in verse 17. "Awake, awake, stand up, O Jerusalem, which has drunk at the hand of the Lord the cup of his fury." All right, chapter 52. "Awake, awake, put on strength, O Zion, put on thy beautiful garments, O Jerusalem, the holy city, for henceforth shall there no more come unto thee uncircumcised and unclean. Shake thyself from the dust. Arise and sit down, O Jerusalem. Loose thyself from the bands of thy neck, O captive daughter of Jerusalem." And so, again, Paul is appropriating these prophecies, encouraging his audience to don't sleep, awake. Okay. Peter would write, "Be sober, be vigilant." That's as opposed to being asleep, slumbering. "Be sober, be vigilant." Why? Because your adversary, the devil, as a roaring lion, walks about, seeking whom he may devour. And see, they were encouraging their audiences to not be like what we read about in Revelation 3:15, the church at Laodicea, who had become lukewarm. And Jesus told them, "I'll spew thee out of my mouth." And remember, Jesus said, "Because iniquity shall abound, the love of the many, the majority, shall wax cold." And so this is what they were all encouraging their audiences to not do. Don't become lukewarm. Don't become apathetic. Don't become complacent. Don't just be slumbering and sleeping, or you're going to be overtaken like a thief in the night when the bridegroom comes. The bridegroom is tarrying. All right, so while the bridegroom tarried, they all slumbered and slept. "And at midnight there was a cry made, Behold, the bridegroom comes. Go you out to meet him." And so again, remember, John, the baptizer, identified Jesus as the bridegroom there in John 3 and verse 29. And so we can look then at Revelation 19. "Let us be glad and rejoice, give honor to him, for the marriage of the Lamb is come. His wife has made herself ready." Okay, this is pertaining to the timing. All right, again, the bridegroom tarried. Paul wrote in Hebrews that it would be a very, very little while. And so John then is writing in the book of Revelation, and this is following the judgment of the harlot, which was Jerusalem, that the time of the wedding had come. And again, we see this. We see that the bride comes down adorned for her husband in Revelation 21, 1 through 4, and that the bride is identified as the Lamb's wife in verse 9, and that it is referred to, she is referred to as the Holy Jerusalem there in verse 10, Revelation 21 and verse 10. I want us to think about something here. I want us to notice here in Revelation 21, verses 9 and 10. All right, there came unto me one of the seven angels that had the seven vials full of the seven last plagues, and talked with me, saying, Come hither, and I will show thee the bride, the Lamb's wife. And he carried me away in the Spirit to a great and high mountain, and showed me that great city, Holy Jerusalem, descending out of heaven from God. Do you see anything of interest there? He carried me away in the Spirit to a great and high mountain. I can't help but wonder if this is not, in the Spirit now, if this is not the same great and high mountain that the devil took Jesus upon in Matthew 4:8 and showed him all the kingdoms of the world in a moment of time. You remember that? I mean, we'll see a few more things here. So we recall then how that in Daniel 2, that the stone that was cut out of the mountain without hands, it smote the image, and remember, it break in pieces the image, right? The iron, the clay, the brass, the silver, and the gold was all broken in pieces together. They were consumed together. So again, I can't help but wonder, and especially when we look at Revelation 11, verse 15, at the last trump, all right, the seventh angel sounded, that's the last trump. There were great voices in heaven saying, The kingdoms of this world are become the kingdoms of our Lord and of his Christ, and he will reign forever and ever. That's the fulfillment of the stone cut out of the mountain without hands that broke all those kingdoms in pieces together. But I wonder, is this parallel to John being taken up on this great and high mountain and showed all these things, and he could see the great city, the holy Jerusalem, the New Jerusalem. He could see that coming down, descending out of heaven from God, and that if this was not the coming of the Lord that Paul spoke of in 1 Thessalonians 4, and that they would be caught up together to meet them in the air. And we'll say more about that a little bit further down here as we get to that. But I mean, just think about these things here. And I mean, I see a picture in my mind of the holy city coming down, descending down, and consuming all of these kingdoms of the world that the devil showed Jesus on this exceeding high mountain. That's just food for thought, something to think about, all right? And so then again, recall that in Ephesians 2, Paul said, Wherein in times past you walked according to the course of this world, according to the prince of the power of the air that now works in children of disobedience. And that in 1 Thessalonians 4, that when they would see the Lord coming in the clouds, that they would be caught up together with them to meet the Lord in the air. So again, this is another picture of one realm consuming another realm. Okay? Again, food for thought. And of course, we see in Hebrews 12, and I wanted to make the connection here again. All right, so we see in Revelation 21:10 that the bride, the Lamb's wife, the New Jerusalem, is called the Holy Jerusalem in verse 10. It's called the New Jerusalem in verse 2. It's called the Holy Jerusalem in verse 10. And then in Hebrews 12, Paul tells them, you have arrived, you are come unto Mount Zion, to the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem, which is the church of the firstborn. So these things are all synonymous. They're all pointing to the fulfillment of the same thing. All right, now, so the cry was made, bridegroom comes. And so again, remember that we studied previously in Matthew 22 that as far as the timing of the wedding, the king made a wedding for his son, remember? And he sent his servants, and the men brutally treated the servants, killed some of them. It says, when the king heard thereof, he was wroth, and he sent forth his armies and destroyed those murderers and burned up their city. They even killed the king's son. Then he said to his servants, the wedding is ready. So again, here's the timing. When was the wedding ready? When the city was burned up. And if this is pertaining to the coming of the kingdom, and it was, then the only city that was burned up was Jerusalem. All right? And so again, recalling that Isaiah predicted that when this would take place, that it would never be rebuilt, Isaiah 25:2. And verse 12 then, where Isaiah said, the fortress of the high fort of your wall shall he bring down, lay low, bring it even to the dust. So this creates the inclusio. But right in the context of this inclusio of the destruction of the temple and the city, we have the wedding banquet. Verse 6, and in this mountain shall the Lord of hosts make unto all the people a feast of fat things, a feast of wines on the lees, of fat things full of marrow, of wines on the lees well refined. And he will destroy in this mountain the face of the covering cast over all the people. That's 2 Corinthians chapter 3, when the veil would be taken away. He will swallow up death in victory. That's the resurrection that Paul quotes in 1 Corinthians 15, stating that the resurrection will be the fulfillment of this prophecy. But this prophecy is in the contextual timing of the destruction of the city and the temple. And again, remember that Christ was once offered to bear the sins of many, and unto him that look for him he shall appear the second time without sin unto salvation. And so remember that Paul wrote that the church was espoused unto Christ. The wedding hadn't taken place yet when Paul wrote that, 2 Corinthians 11 verse 2. But again, in Hebrews, he would say that in a very, very little while, he that shall come will come and will not delay. He will not tarry. All right, so the cry was made, behold, the bridegroom comes, go you out to meet him. Now we have an interesting word right here. And that is apantesis. And this is the noun, and it's only used 4 times in the New Testament, 2 in this text. It was used in verse 1, that they took their lamps and they went forth to meet the bridegroom, all right? So that's the word, and it's used again then here in verse 6. Now this word, defined, means a meeting, an encounter, and it comes from the verb apanteo, and you can see the information I have here on the screen. The verb usage we find examples of, for instance, in Mark 14 verse 13, that he's sending forth 2 of his disciples. He said unto them, go you into the city, and there shall meet you a young man bearing a pitcher of water, follow him. And then in Luke 17, another instance of the verb usage, as he, Jesus, as he entered into a certain village, there met him 10 men that were lepers. So this is the verb usage of this. But the noun usage we see here in this verse, and as I said, twice in this text, and it's used in two other places. So we're going to look at we're going to look at both of them. But I want us to notice that in Acts 28, Paul was on his way to Rome. All right, and it says, where we found brethren and were desired to tarry with them 7 days. And so we went toward Rome. And from there, when the brethren heard of us, they came to meet us as far as Appiaforum. They came to meet us, so that's our word. They came to meet us as far as Appiaforum, the 3 taverns, whom when Paul saw, he thanked God and took courage. And when they came to Rome, so now I've got a question for you. When we think about this word, these men from Rome, they went out to meet Paul, right? That's what the text says. All right, now, when they met Paul, what did Paul do? Did Paul turn around and take those brethren back with him to where he came from? Or did those brethren that went out to meet Paul, did they escort him to his destination, which was Rome? Well, I think it's overwhelmingly obvious from reading the text that they accompanied him, they escorted him to his destination. All right? And so then it's used again in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4. All right? So, and we're familiar with the text, so let's just look at verse 17. Then we which are alive and remain shall be caught up, and that's the word where people try to invent the rapture theory. But notice, then we which are alive and remain shall be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air. So when we look at in our text, when the virgins went out to meet the bridegroom, what did they do? Did the bridegroom take the virgins and go back to wherever he came from? Or did the wise virgins escort the bridegroom into the wedding? Well, you know the answer to that. And you know the answer to our example here in Acts 28, that those who went to meet the person escorted them to their final destination. So, what is the usage of the word in 1 Thessalonians 4? That would be those who met the Lord in the air, who went to meet the Lord in the air, that they would escort him to his final destination, which was the wedding, which was to place his tabernacle among men, John 14:23. That's the final destination. And so, again, the linguistics here and the way this word is used does not allow this idea of everybody being raptured off the earth at the end of time and Jesus taking them back to heaven from where he came. That's not the definition or the usage of the word. So anyway, study that. And Vines says of this word, it is used in the papyra of a newly arriving magistrate. It seems that the special idea of the word was the official welcome of a newly arrived dignitary. All right, so that pretty well explains the definition and the usage of the word, and it certainly does not fit the dispensational or even the amillennial in which we were raised. It doesn't fit that idea. All right, so at midnight there was a cry made, "Behold, the bridegroom comes, go ye out to meet him." Then all those virgins arose and trimmed their lamps. Now, I'll show you a couple of words here in just a minute. It's interesting that Adam Clarke wrote, "I have seen some of these eastern lamps or lanthorns, the body of which was a skeleton of wood and threads, covered with a very thin transparent membrane or a very fine gauze, and decorated with flowers painted on it. It is probable that the nuptial lamps were highly decorated in this way, though the act mentioned here may mean no more than preparing the lamps for burning." So I thought that was interesting what he had to say about those lamps. And we see in John 18 and verse 3 that Judas, then having received a band of men and officers from the chief priests and Pharisees, coming thither with lanterns and torches. And now, if memory serves me right, the word that is rendered lamps here is the word rendered torches in John 18. But even this verse shows you they had different means of lighting. They had an oil lantern. They had torches, which essentially was a rag wrapped around the end of a stick dipped in oil, and which would burn for quite a long time. But anyway, they had different means of light. Of course, Matthew 5:15 talks about the candle. No man lights a candle, puts it under a bushel. So this was another means of light. Now, another interesting parallel text that we can find in Luke, 12. Let your loins be girded about and your lights burning. And you yourselves like unto men who wait for their Lord. Again, that's the whole crux of this parable. When he will return from the wedding, that when he comes and knocks, they may open unto him immediately. Blessed are those servants whom the Lord, when he comes, finds watching. Verily I say unto you, that he shall gird himself and make them to sit down to meat, and will come forth and serve them. And if he will come in the second watch, or come in the third watch, see, that's why they were to be watching, because they didn't know in what watch he would come. And so they were to be watching. All right, and so then all those virgins arose and trimmed their lamps, and the foolish said unto the wise, give us of your oil, for our lamps are gone out. And this is actually, the New King James gets this right. This is in the present tense. Our lamps are going out. So they weren't completely out yet, but they were on the verge. They were going out. We can learn from what Jesus, from the principles that he's teaching here, that they were to be prepared. And that, again, the reason that they were considered to be foolish was because they did not take extra preparation. But they asked to borrow some oil. I don't know how they pay it back, but give us of your oil, for our lamps are going out. But the wise answered, saying, no, not so, lest there be not enough for us and you. So, in other words, if we give part of ours to you, then none of us will have enough. We'll run out of oil. All of us will. All right, so the advice then is, go ye rather to them that sell, and buy for yourselves. So again, if we think about the analogies that we've heard through the years, we can make one right here, where Paul says, let every man prove his own work, and then he shall have rejoicing in himself alone, and not in another. 1 Corinthians 11:28, let a man examine himself, right? And eat of the bread and drink of the cup. And again, 2 Corinthians 13 and verse 5, examine yourselves, whether you be in the, don't be worrying so much about your neighbor, examine yourself, whether you be in the faith, prove your own selves. And see, that's how these wise servants proved themselves, was because they were prepared. They came prepared, and they had extra provisions. All right, so while they went to buy, the bridegroom came, and they that were ready went in with him to the marriage. So again, this is why I said, when the wise went out to meet the bridegroom, what happened? They escorted him into the marriage. All right, so they went to buy, and this is, the concept here is kind of reminiscent of what Jesus taught there in the previous chapter. Then shall two be in the field, one will be taken, the other left. Two will be grinding at the mill, one will be taken, the other left. Well, why is that? Because the one that was left was the one who knew the time of the Lord's coming, and they weren't captured in the raid when the city was besieged. And again, this analogy is used by Jesus in Luke 17 in specific response and answer to the question of when the kingdom would come. And so the bridegroom came, and so we look at Revelation 1 verse 7, behold, he comes with the clouds, every eye will see him, they also which pierced him, and all the kindreds of the earth shall wail because of him. And we're not going to take time to read all these passages that we have here, but you can stop the video, and I encourage you to do so and look up these correlations, as Revelation 1:7 is taken from Zechariah 12:10, Daniel 7:13. It is exactly parallel with Matthew 24:30. But notice in Hosea 2, notice here it says, "And in that day I will make a covenant for them with the beasts of the field and with the fowls of the heaven and the creeping things of the ground, and I will break the bow and the sword and the battle out of the earth, and I will make them to lie down safely." So this is a picture of wars and weapons and so forth being taken away, and a illustration of peace, like in Isaiah 65:20 through 25, following the new creation. All right, so now notice he says, "And I will betroth thee to me forever. Yea, I will betroth thee unto me in righteousness, and in judgment, and in loving kindness, and in mercies. I will even betroth thee unto me in faithfulness, and thou shalt know the Lord. And it shall come to pass in that day, I will hear, saith the Lord, I will hear the heavens, and they shall hear the earth. And the earth shall hear the corn, and the wine, and the oil, and they shall hear Jezreel. And I will sow her unto me in the earth, and I will have mercy upon her that had not obtained mercy. And I will say to them which were not my people, Thou art my people. And they shall say, Thou art my God." And so this was pointing forward to the wedding, when Jehovah would betroth Israel to him in faithfulness. Peter quotes this prophecy, or cites this prophecy to his audience, 2 Peter 2:9 and 10, saying, "You are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a peculiar people, that you should show forth the praises of him who hath called you out of darkness into his marvelous light, which in times past were not a people, but are now the people of God." See that? Peter applies this prophecy, which was foretelling the wedding, and he applies that in real time to his audience. Paul appropriates this prophecy in Romans chapter 9. "What if God, willing to show his wrath and to make his power known, endured with much long suffering," there's the bridegroom tarrying, there's that long suffering that Peter talked about in 2 Peter chapter 3. "What if he endured with much long suffering the vessels of wrath fitted to destruction, that he might make known the riches of his glory upon the vessels of mercy, which he had afore prepared unto glory, even us, whom he hath called, not of the Jews only, but also of the Gentiles, as he said in Hosea." And then he quotes this prophecy of Hosea. And so both Peter and Paul applied this prophecy of the betrothal. And again, Paul said the church was betrothed, was espoused to the Lord. He had espoused them to one husband, right? All right, so we see these things coming to fruition. All right, and so they went into the marriage. Again, we've already looked at Matthew 22, and we've looked at all these passages I have here in line with this verse here. And he says, "Then, and afterward came also the other virgins, saying, Lord, Lord, open unto us." Well, this is similar to what Jesus said in Matthew 7, "Not everyone that says unto me, Lord, Lord, shall enter into the kingdom of heaven, but he who does the will of my Father which is in heaven. Many will say unto me in that day, Lord, Lord, have we not prophesied in your name, and in your name have cast out devils, and in your name done many wonderful works? And I will profess unto them, I never knew you. Depart from me, ye that work iniquity." And Luke 6:46, "Why call ye me Lord, Lord, and do not the things which I say?" And so again, that's a good fit, if you will, here, because he's telling them, watch and be ready. You don't know when you don't know the day and the hour when the Son of Man is going to come. You don't know when the bridegroom is going to come, but you have to be watching and waiting and ready. And so why would someone say, Lord, Lord, when they weren't doing what he said? And one of those primary things was to be watching for those signs. So he says, he answered and said, Verily I say unto you, I know you not. And this parable concludes with, therefore, so everything that he's already stated, watch therefore. Why? For you know neither the day nor the hour wherein the Son of Man comes. So even Jesus identifies the bridegroom as the Son of Man. And he's saying, just like that they were to be ready when the bridegroom would come, he's telling them, his disciples, you are to be ready. You're to be watching, not slumbering and sleeping. You're to be watching and to be ready because you don't know the day or the hour. Well, that's exactly what he said in Matthew 24:36, the assumed transition verse. So we come here and says that again. Is that another transition? Of course not, folks. Again, the whole point of the Olivet Discourse was to encourage them to watch and be ready for the coming of the Son of Man. And so he tells them they don't know the day or the hour, verse 36. Watch therefore, for you know not what hour your Lord comes, verse 42. Therefore be you also ready, for in such an hour as you think not, the Son of Man comes, verse 44. And then here in chapter 25, verse 13, watch therefore, for you know neither the day nor the hour wherein the Son of Man comes. And so again, this is the same theme throughout both of these chapters. This is not a divided discourse as commentaries teach people and then people reiterate the same false information. Jesus is talking about the coming of the Son of Man. The coming of the Son of Man will be the parousia of the Son of Man. He's talking about the parousia of the Son of Man prior to verse 36 of 24. He's talking about the parousia of the Son of Man after verse 36 of 24. Same thing. That creates an inclusio. And again, this statement, you don't know the day or the hour, is reiterated no less than 4 times in this text. This is not a divided discourse. He is teaching them to watch and to be ready, because those things are going to come on them in their generation, the generation that would see the dismantling of the Jewish temple. And again, Isaiah said that when that took place, it would never be rebuilt. So that's impossible for those things to be in our future. Impossible. Okay? All right, so we're going to end our lesson here. And I thank you so much again for your time and studying with us. And I hope that you won't forget to hit the like button and to share our videos with your friends and neighbors and help us to spread the word to study the Bible in context. All right, so until our next scheduled lesson, I pray that God will bless you richly in your study of His Word, and you have a blessed day.